Hi, and welcome back to Lesson 10 videos. This is video number 2. We just finished talking about the vertebral column. Now we're going to get into the last part of the axial skeleton, which is the thoracic cage. This is going to include your sternum, aka your breastbone, your ribs, and also the thoracic vertebrae, because if you remember, that's what your ribs are attached to, or your thoracic vertebrae. So first, let's go ahead and talk about the sternum and all the different parts of it. The sternum is actually 3 bones fused together. The bottom is the xiphoid process. And remember that that word process means that you usually have a lot of muscle attachment here, so a lot of your chest muscles are going to attach to the xiphoid process. The body has these little notches in it that we call facets, and this is where your ribs attach to with cartilage. And then this top portion here is called the manubrium. It has the clavicular notch. That is where your clavicle attaches to. So please make sure that you know those 3 major bones of the sternum. The manubrium is the top, the body, and then the xiphoid process. All right, your ribs. So you have 12 pairs of ribs. Your first 7, so pairs 1 through 7, are known as true ribs because they directly attach to the sternum. So you can see there's this what we call costal cartilage here, directly attaching the rib to the sternum. Your next 5 pairs are called false ribs because they indirectly attach to the sternum. So you can kind of see here that they kind of just all come together to form one big piece of costal cartilage that attaches to the sternum. And then the bottom 2 are called floating ribs, which means that they're not attached to the sternum at all. So that was the end of the axial skeleton. Now we're going to move on to the appendicular skeleton. So you remember your axial is going to be skull, vertebral column, and thoracic cage. The appendicular is your limbs and your pelvic girdle. So first, let's go ahead and talk about one of the major girdles, the shoulder girdle. It consists of the clavicle and the scapula. So the clavicle is commonly known as your collarbone. It attaches to the manubrium of the sternum, and then the scapula laterally, and it prevents shoulder dislocation. So basically, it allows your shoulder to not just kind of cave in forward. And you can see it up here. Okay, here's your clavicle. This is where it attaches to your scapula, and this is where it attaches to the sternum. And then I love this picture down here. It's really cool. It just shows that someone broke their clavicle and they had to put a rod in it. Okay, so next we're moving on to the scapula, commonly known as your shoulder blade. And there's a few really important parts that we need to know. First is the acromion, and this is a really kind of enlarged part that goes around what we call the spine of the scapula, and this is what's going to attach to your clavicle and create what we call the AC joint, the acromioclavicular joint. And if you're a wrestler, you've probably heard of somebody dislocating their AC joint. It's really common in wrestlers, and that just means that you have separation between the clavicle and the scapula. The other thing that you really need to know about the scapula is the glenoid cavity, and this is the socket where your humerus fits into. It's a ball and it's a ball and socket joint, meaning that you really can kind of move everywhere. So let's take a look at the scapula. So here's that glenoid cavity I said it's really important to know. So the head of the humerus is going to fit into here and create a nice ball and socket joint. And then up here is the acromion, and that is where your clavicle is going to attach to. So if you see over here, this is another kind of good picture because it has the clavicle actually attached to it. And then here you can see where you're creating that joint with the humerus and the scapula. And then here's a nice back view. This portion here is the spine of the scapula. So I know I mentioned that earlier. All right, so let's get into the arms, the upper limbs. So the humerus is your upper arm bone. It's a very typical long bone and attaches to the glenoid cavity. It also has a lot of what we call tuberosities, which are kind of little bumps that allow muscles to attach. So you have what we call deltoid tuberosities that allow the deltoid muscles to attach to it. And then you also have the olecranon and coronoid fossa. Fossas are kind of grooves within a bone, and these are what are going to allow your elbow joint to come into play. So the humerus attaching to the ulna of your lower arm bone, of your lower arm. All right, so let's take a look here. Here's the humerus. Here is what we call the head. You will definitely need to know that. The head is what fits into the scapula to form that joint. And then if you look down here, here are those two fossas, the coronoid and olecranon. And these are what are going to help create the elbow joint. And then when you look here, here's your big deltoid tuberosity. It's a little just bump on the bone that allows your deltoid muscles to attach. Okay, the lower arm, the radius and the ulna. So if you're in the anatomical position, the radius is going to be on the lateral side. It's going to be closest to your thumb. And then your ulna is going to be on the other side. So it's going to be more medial. And what's kind of interesting is when you actually rotate your arm, the two bones cross over. And they're connected by kind of a really flexible membrane called the interosseous membrane. Okay, so here is our radius and our ulna. We're talking about the radius first, and you can see that they're connected by this nice membrane here. And this is really cool. A lot of people don't know this happens, but when you turn your palm over and you rotate your arm, the radius and the ulna actually cross over. Little fun fact of the day. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about the ulna. The ulna is what actually is going to create the elbow joint with the humerus. So it has what we call a coronoid process and an olecranon process that fits into that coronoid fossa and olecranon fossa. See what they did there? They kind of named it similar so you could understand. So that's what's going to create that elbow joint. And you can see here, the radius does not make the elbow joint at all. It is the ulna that is attaching to the humerus. Okay, the hand, the last part of our upper limbs. The hand is going to consist of carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So your carpal is going to be your wrist bones. Metacarpals are going to be the bones in the palm of your hand, and then your phalanges are your fingers. And you have 14 total phalange bones. You have 3 on each finger, but you only have 2 for your thumb. So if we look here, the carpals are going to be your wrist bones. Metacarpals are going to be in the palm of your hand, and then here is your phalanges, and you have a proximal one in green, that means closer to the body, the intermediate, and then the distal phalanges. So every finger has 3 except for the thumb, it only has 2. Okay, so now we're moving down into the pelvic girdle. The pelvic girdle is formed by 2 hip bones, and they're called coxal bones. A lot of people don't realize this, but the pelvis is really heavy, and it's 2 very, very large coxal bones, and they're attached to the sacrum of the axial skeleton. So your coxal bone, or your hip bone, is actually a fusion of 3 bones. You have the ilium, which creates that sacroiliac joint with the sacrum, the ischium, and the pubis. And the pubis bone is the bottom bone, and this is where both of your coxal bones come together by what we call the pubic symphysis, which is just basically a tough piece of cartilage holding them together. All right, so if we take a look here, here's that pubic symphysis I was telling you about. Okay, so this would be the pubic bone. The ilium is up here, and then the ischium is this bone right here. So all three bones fuse together at one location. And this is a very important term to know, the acetabulum. The acetabulum is this groove that creates the socket for your femur. So that's your hip joint really, is where these three bones come together so that the femur can fit into there. And what's really kind of cool to look at over here is the difference between a male and a female pelvis. What you'll notice is this angle down here is much wider. Think about it for a second. Why would a female need a wider pelvis than a male? It's to help give birth. We need a wider pelvis so that it's easier for us to be able to push out our newborn. All right, moving on to the femur. So we're going down to the lower limb. The femur, strongest, heaviest bone of the body. I had a patient one time in the physical therapy clinic that broke his femur, and it's a long journey. It's a very tough bone to come back from. It has a ball attached to the proximal end that fits into the acetabulum, and then below that is what we call the neck. And when you hear people break their hip, especially older individuals, they're actually snapping this neck. And then below the neck, you have greater and lesser trochanters, which are kind of larger bumps that allow for muscle attachment. And then you have an intercondylar fossa and condyles, which allow you to make your knee joint. So if we look, here's the head of the femur up here, so that's going to fit into the acetabulum. Then you have the neck. So you can see this is where people snap and break their hips, as they break that neck. As they get older, bone density just goes down and it's really easy to snap. Okay, and here's your trochanters. You have your greater and lesser trochanter for muscle attachment. And then down here you have those medial and lateral condyles and that intercondylar fossa, which helps you create your knee. Okay, the tib and the fib, your lower leg muscles. They are connected, just like your radius and ulna, by a nice membrane. The tibia is known as your shin bone, and the fibula is lateral. The fibula is really thin and stick-like, and the tibia is the really important bone here because it's actually your weight-bearing bone and forming the knee joint with your femur. Okay, so this is the tib and the fib here. All right, you'll see the tibia is your shin bone, and then the fibula over here is more thin and stick-like, and here is where we get the knee joint. Okay, the foot. The foot has tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. So just like the hand has carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges, the foot is referred to as tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. The tarsus is 7 bones that kind of form the back half of your foot. And the really important tarsal bone I want you to know is the calcaneus, which is the heel bone, and then your talus. The calcaneus, though, is really important. Then you have the 5 metatarsals here, making up the actual kind of base of your foot. And then your phalanges, and just like your hand, you have 3 for each toe and 2 for your big toe. And you can see here's that calcaneus, okay, your big heel bone. And then you can see here you have other tarsals kind of making up the ankle. Okay, here's just another picture showing you from above. That calcaneus and talus bone are the 2 big ones. Here's the rest of your tarsals, your metatarsals, and your phalanges. So thanks for watching this video. That's the end of our lesson 10 videos. Make sure your note guide is completely filled out and go ahead and start your assignments.